Welcome back to Mission Ready, the VA Disability Podcast. I'm Dr. Marshall Barr, physician, disabled combat veteran, and founder of Xterra Health. I'm rejoined today by my co-host, Josh Ackler, our Director of Veteran Outreach. And today we're talking about sleep apnea, which is on a lot of veterans' minds. It's a big one, and I know there's a big change coming up that we're going to talk about later, correct?
Correct.
So it's good to have you back, Josh.
Oh, it's good to be back.
Sleep apnea is, a unique one. It's kind of challenging. So the key is I'm going to try to keep it slow and talk slow for my fellow Marine here so you can keep up, all right?
Yes.
So sleep apnea, I always say that sleep apnea is like a VA disability claim. It's unpredictable, and usually the results are unsatisfying.
Absolutely.
So what is sleep apnea? I kind of want to get into it, just general terms from a medical standpoint. Sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea. So what does that mean? So that's when you're having obstruction in your breathing, particularly at nighttime when you're sleeping. Mm-hmm. A lot of guys, their spouses, their significant others will say they snore, they have episodes where they stop breathing. That's the most characteristic sign of sleep apnea. And it is a common one we see with a lot of veterans. It was not commonly diagnosed back in the Vietnam era. It's rather relatively new when it comes to diagnosing. So that's why we're seeing such a large preponderance of veterans coming and claiming it now. One of the big things is the trying to differentiate between how do you connect it, either a primary or secondary. So I want you to are you able to talk about that? What's the difference between connecting sleep apnea primary service connected versus secondary service connected?
Okay, so for sleep apnea for primary, that's a direct service. So basically that's going to be the rarest and most likely 99.99% not going to happen, is going to be documented in service or diagnosed in service. Never happens.
Yeah,
I've had thousands and thousands of vets that came to me that wanted to claim sleep apnea. Not one was diagnosed in service. It's always had to be as a secondary condition. Would be for PTSD. Would be for another very common one would be tinnitus. Would be a very common one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The sinus conditions, that would be bronchitis, any sort of like respiratory condition.
Yeah,
would be a very common one for a secondary condition.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. So we've had a lot of veterans come, and most of them come to us have been denied for sleep apnea. And we'll start asking, so how did you apply for it last time? Well, I applied for it as a primary service connected disability. I'm trying to say it happened because of my military. And they'll come and they'll say, well, my spouse or my fellow soldiers, Marines, they said, they wrote witness statements saying that I snored, I stopped breathing, and I gave them all this evidence. I wrote a personal statement, but they still denied it. I don't understand. I've been diagnosed with sleep apnea by the VA. Why am I still getting denied?
I can probably say this is the VA's cop-out, and I'm probably going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, but this is not from It's not coming from my mouth. This is from the VA. The most common reason why that the VA is going to deny is obesity. They're gonna cop out and say, why is it our fault? Because your BMI is above 35.
When we get back to the primary and secondary, right? So primary, unless, like you said, it was written into the military service treatment records that veteran, John Doe snored, has issues breathing, stopped breathing, or he's diagnosed sleep apnea in the military, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be denied.
Yes. And
then that's where you're going to need to start thinking about, okay, well, I got sleep apnea. What are some of the other common or maybe uncommon causes of sleep apnea?
Oh, yes.
And that's where you're talking about those secondary connections, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and I think even with the secondary service connections, I know some of the more common ones are going to be, PTSD, musculoskeletal things, chronic pain, rhinitis, sinusitis. A lot of guys will still get denied, actually, and one of the biggest reasons, they'll come and I'll read their denial, and it says, we have recognized a favorable findings that you have, yes, we recognize you have a diagnosis of sleep apnea. However, we do not think there is a nexus to it, to the service.
Correct.
And usually 9 times out of 10, it's going to say veterans' obesity is more likely than not the cause of their sleep apnea.
Yes. And then something I will see often is etiology, saying something about with their obesity, saying that due to their physiology, that their neck, the circumference of their neck, it squeezes it in, but they don't look into the reasoning why the obesity. So we're like, say with a back condition, somebody can't physically work out. We're not all the same, we're not like Mr. Barr here who gets to work out all the time and he's, has a perfect specimen here.
Well, thank you.
And I got my, desk 25, but, we're not all basically the same as we were 18, 19. We're not in the best of shape.
And I think that is one thing I want to let viewers know. The common causes of sleep apnea that they're going to look at and try to rule out. 1, are you over age 55? 2, are you male? Now, those are unmodifiable things. You can't change your age or your sex. But the other things they're going to look at are, what is your neck circumference? Is it 17 inches or larger? And then what is your BMI? They consider a BMI of 25 or higher overweight. Now, most Americans are going to be a BMI of 25 or higher. Now, obesity is when you hit 30 or higher, but they're going to even say 25 or higher. Right. So I would challenge you when they, go to your computer, plug in BMI calculator, male, what your height is, what your weight is, and what is my BMI. And if it is 25 or higher, then you're going to have a reason to justify why you're overweight. And it doesn't matter if you're physically fit or if you're, got a dad bod, right?
Right.
It's the numbers don't lie, and that's the system that they use. BMI is a little antiquated system. It doesn't take into consideration if you've got lean body mass, if you're work out a lot, if you're a bodybuilder. And so a lot of these guys, they'll come to us and say, I'm not overweight. Here, they send me pictures. They're like, hey, this is what I look like. I work out. I work out all the time. I lift. But they're saying I'm overweight and obese. That doesn't make sense.
When I first got out, I was heavy into heavy lifting. I was at my max 220 pounds, and that was when I was heavy lifting. I had no neck. I had literally like this. They weren't invisible. I didn't have.
Some would argue you still don't have a neck, Josh.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah. I still work out a little bit, but not as much as I did before. But I literally had no neck. I couldn't put my arms down because my lats were so huge. And they were like, you need to lose weight. And I'm like, why? I was like, my body fat percentage is like 2.5%. But you're overweight. I'm not overweight.
I know. It's kind of ridiculous when you break it down and you look at someone's body composition. Why do I bring it up? Because most of the time, if you're going to get sleep apnea service connected, you're going to have to go the secondary route. You're going to have to tie it to one of your already service connected disabilities.
Right.
And the question I always ask when I'm interviewing a veteran when they're trying to claim sleep apnea, first of all, I ask, do you have a sleep study? Because if you don't have a sleep study, then you can't say you have sleep apnea.
Right.
It has to be diagnosed by a sleep study. It can be a home sleep study. It can be a sleep lab sleep study. But you got to have that sleep study. If you don't have it, don't try to claim it. Second, I ask, are you on CPAP? It's a big question right now because right now the current ratings are if you have CPAP, automatic 50%. So that's important to know. And then my third question, I always ask, what's your current weight and what is your height? And if their weight and height are beyond that 25 BMI, my next follow-up questions are going to be, well, let's talk about your obesity or your overweight and how did you get to that? Because we need to establish, if we're tying it to a secondary condition, we've got to be able to justify that weight. Because I tell them if we don't, then we have to anticipate they're going to come back and say, yeah, you got sleep apnea, but again, we think it's because you're overweight.
The cop out.
Yes. And, there actually is a lot of VA legal precedent that has already been set. There's cases where they have recognized that there are service-connected disabilities that can lead to the intermediate step of obesity.
Yes.
And they recognize that, and they recognize that that can cause sleep apnea because they understand that obesity is one of the number one risk factors for sleep apnea.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the more common secondary conditions that you can claim or link sleep apnea to. I think you've already mentioned a couple of them, right?
Correct.
So I think mental health is sometimes the one that everyone gravitates towards. PTSD. They think they got to have PTSD in order to get their sleep apnea.
Don't need it.
You don't need it. But when we do talk about sleep apnea and PTSD, which kind of PTSD, in your opinion, have you seen the high success with getting service-connected sleep apnea?
Okay, so with that said, it's combat PTSD. So the VA has studies out there, and it's the only tried and true that they will service connect it. But when I say combat PTSD, it's the sandbox. They kind of link those two together, and they're letting it go through, and they're saying yes, okay, we're going to let you connect that together, and they're going to grant it. But it's never really a guarantee. I mean, it still does get, sometimes it comes through the cracks.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go through.
Yeah.
And then they still have to get that nexus letter.
Even with combat PTSD, non-combat PTSD, you're likely looking at probably needing an independent medical opinion or a nexus letter, whether that's from your own private doctor or from someone like us to be able to do that for you.
Right.
And that's because it provides that rationale, provides the evidence-based literature, medical studies, legal cases to justify it. But most important is you have to justify again why. You got to show how it is either caused or aggravated your sleep apnea. So one of the common, there are both direct and indirect ways that PTSD causes sleep apnea. One of the direct ways, it does cause issues centrally with your brain that, leads to central hypoxic events or, episodes where you stop breathing.
Yes.
But more commonly, it's going to be those indirect causes. Most commonly, it's going to be causing weight gain. I can tell you a lot of guys with PTSD, they usually will have some form of PTSD-induced anxiety, depression, and that's going to affect their motivation to want to do anything. They self-isolate. They don't want to go to the gym because there's people. A lot of guys, when they get depressed, their appetite changes. A lot of guys will tend to gravitate towards eating.
Yes.
They eat their emotions.
Yes.
And the kind of food you eat, usually carbohydrate-rich, sugary foods, because studies have shown carbohydrates, they cause the dopamine to get released and it makes you happy, right? And so what do? You eat, you gain weight. And then you add on top of that, not working out, you gain weight. And then another common one with PTSD is the medications. So I always ask medications because most of the antidepressants out there, one of the most common side effects are weight gain.
Ooh, absolutely.
So it's important that I ask. Now, if someone's only been on it for a couple months, we can't use that argument. But if they've been on it for years and years, and we have a documented weight before they started and the documented weight now, and we can show that trend of weight gain, that's another rationale for justifying that obesity claim.
Absolutely.
Another one is if they are not on medication for PTSD, a question I typically will gravitate towards are, they have to have some kind of coping mechanism. A lot of guys will drink alcohol.
Yes. Carbohydrates.
Yeah, empty calories. And typically when you're drinking, you don't make good dietary choices. So I ask about their drinking patterns, how often they're drinking, how long they've been drinking like that. And, that is another reason that we can justify that weight gain.
Right.
And I say all this because that paints an entire picture
right
of how that causes obesity and how that can cause sleep apnea. Now, I know we've talked about PTSD being a common one, but a lot of guys don't realize that it doesn't have to be PTSD. Sometimes you get anchored. It has to be PTSD. I have to have that PTSD diagnosis.
Right.
Weight gain, antidepressants are not unique to PTSD. So you can have bipolar, depression, anxiety, and those are all going to be a very similar mechanism to which they both directly cause sleep apnea and indirectly cause it through weight gain. We're talking about weight gain as one of the intermediate steps, so I think it's important that we talk about some of the other common and uncommon service connect disabilities you can link it to via that weight gain argument. A common one is going to be musculoskeletal stuff.
Yes, very common.
Yeah, and you mentioned already, right? So, knee issues, ankle issues, back, lumbosacral strain, degenerative disc disease, cervical stuff. These are all, when you have these musculoskeletal injuries, once they start developing into this level of chronic pain where you're always in pain, doesn't matter if you're at rest or if you're moving, you're always in pain. Typically, that leads to a level of immobility. You don't want to move around because it hurts, right? It hurts to walk.
Right.
And so if you're immobile, you're going to get sedentary. And if you're sedentary, if you're not calories that go in, if you don't have calories coming out, you're going to gain weight.
Right.
And so we can typically make that argument, if there's a trend in the weight when it comes associated with when they injured themselves. Thyroid issues, particularly hypothyroidism.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that slows your metabolism down. You gain weight, so that's a common one. Diabetes, typically, if you're service connected for diabetes, usually we can look back and say, well, how much do you weigh? And a lot of the times guys are going to be in the obese category with their BMI, and we can typically make that argument that their diabetes, has led to obesity, which in turn leads to sleep apnea. Let's talk about ones that are not through the obesity mechanism,
Right?
Because there are several that do that too. Do you have any that jump out?
Probably is going to be like people with sinus issues. A lot of people that I know that I've seen before would be people that had nasal surgery. Mm-hmm. They had their septum collapse. I've seen that happen so many times that they've had rhinoplasty.
Yeah.
And one side falls, and now they're only breathing on one side of the nostril.
Yeah, deviated septum.
Yes. And now all of a sudden they're because they're blocked up because they have sinusitis along with this. And now, there's no weight involved in this because now it's just the actual the anatomy is causing this. And so, but they're saying again, how is this show? What is the nexus?
The ones that are not involving weight, right, are going to be the ones that actually contribute to obstruction, right? That obstructive physiology.
Right.
And most common ones we are going to see, especially in the GWAT era, are those presumptive conditions of rhinitis, whether that's allergic or non-allergic, and sinusitis.
Right.
And, the importance is to show the severity of the symptoms when it comes to sinusitis and rhinitis. You can't just simply have it and say you got sleep apnea. It has to cause obstruction. So you're talking about the questions I'm always asking, how much congestion are you having? Occlusion of your nostrils. When you got rhinitis, is it just one nostril? Is it both nostrils? Is it complete occlusion? The more occlusion you have, the more likely you are to have sleep apnea. Because if you completely block up that nose and that nasal passage, you become a mouth breather. That tends to lead itself towards sleep apnea physiology. That you get a lot of redundant tissue, it obstructs, and then you have sleep apnea. A lot of times with rhinitis, a lot of guys are saying, well, I got rhinitis, so I should be able to get sleep apnea. Well, it's not as simple as that, right? So the more things you have to show that the severity of that rhinitis, do you have imaging? Do you have a CAT scan or an x-ray of your sinuses that show mucosal thickening? Those are those buzzwords they're looking for. Do you have polyps? Do you have, if they've looked in your nose, do you have polyps? Because those are actual anatomical things that are going to cause obstruction.
Right.
And then when it comes to sinusitis, they're going to want to know, how severe is it? How many episodes are you having per year? Do you need antibiotics for them? How much congestion are you dealing with? And another one that I always look for is how much postnasal drip are you having? How much mucus are you creating? Because the more mucus, the more likely you're going to have obstruction.
And I think another one would be for sinusitis ratings is your 50, when you get up into the highs for your 50, is if you have anything with the bones, you're not getting cleared out, and it requires a surgery.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to do a surgery because it doesn't end very well a lot of times.
100%. The key that we want to try to get here and drive home is there are so many different causes or disabilities that you can be service connected for that can cause sleep apnea. A lot of them are going to need a medical opinion to link them because they're not common. And so a lot of the CMP examiners, they're not used to making that connection. But I mean, you could pretty much go from head to toe and find reasons that can cause sleep apnea. Think about neurological reasons, right? If you got a TBI, traumatic brain injury, that can cause central dysregulation of your sleeping, and that can cause sleep apnea, a very common one. But I mean, you have things like dementia, you've got things like AV malformations, all these things that you're service connected for can lead to sleep apnea. And then you keep going down the line, you go into respiratory conditions, asthma. Actually, asthma, COPD, these cause constrictive disease patterns in your lungs, and that can cause sleep apnea. And there's actually a lot of studies that corroborate that, the sleep apnea, asthma connection.
Right.
And you can go down, even GI stuff. I've been able to get guys connected sleep apnea secondary to GERD.
Yes.
Because a lot of times, if your GERD's really, really bad and you got that CPAP mask on, at nighttime, if you're regurgitating into your CPAP mask, you're not going to be able to wear it.
Right.
And so if you can't be compliant with your treatment, then that's aggravation. Veterans out there, don't get discouraged. The thing is if you've got a service-connected disability, you should look at or reach out to us and say, hey, I've got XYZ, and I have sleep apnea. Is there a connection here? And if there is, we'll find it. If there's not, we'll let you know. Transparency. There is causation and aggravation. A lot of guys forget that. Well, I could claim it as aggravating. So under the CFR 38 regulations, can you let the viewers know what does that mean in that context? Aggravation. What does the VA consider?
I sort of say with something that you're already service connected with, we'll use PTSD as the aggravating thing.
Okay.
So PTSD, you're claustrophobic. You have the mask on.
CPAP mask, right?
Your CPAP mask. You are non-compliant with that because it gives you anxiety of having that on. Take it off. Now your sleep apnea, you're not getting the oxygen that you need in order to minimize your hypoxic or apnea events. Now your sleep apnea is even worse.
Yeah, that's 100% right. So
you're aggravating it even to a higher level.
Yeah, so aggravation means that your claimed disability, right, that whatever you're claiming it secondary to, and you use PTSD as an example, if you didn't have PTSD, it would progress as it normally would. But because you have PTSD, now it is being aggravated beyond its normal course, meaning that because you have PTSD, your sleep apnea is getting worse. Because again, you talked about it, non-compliance with the treatment.
Correct.
So if you can't tolerate that CPAP mask, which is really the only definitive way to treat sleep apnea, then by definition, you're aggravating it and it's going to progress worse than it normally would have otherwise.
Right.
So that is what aggravation is. And, PTSD is just one example. And I know you used about claustrophobia. That's a common one. A lot of guys have PTSD-induced anxiety. They get really anxious when that mask is strapped to their face and it's blowing air into their face, and so they rip it off. Another one that we see a lot with PTSD, nightmares. So a lot of guys will have nightmares, and depending on how frequent your nightmares are, if it's every night, multiple times a week, well, when you have a nightmare, you're typically waking up in a panic and you're ripping anything off that's attached to you, and you've got a hose strapped to your face, you're ripping it off.
Right.
And a lot of guys with nightmares, they're so wired up they can't fall back asleep. So now, and if they do, they don't want to put that mask back on. So they're being non-compliant with their CPAP, and so what's happening? Their sleep apnea is going to get worse. It's aggravating. So that is an argument we can use. Another one we see a lot. It can be through a lot of different ways too, not just PTSD. Another one I see, cervical degenerative disc disease. When it gets really, really bad, say the pain is so bad, now you got stiffness, you can't really rotate your head, or you've been fused in your neck. A lot of guys they can't tolerate sleeping on their back, which is really the only way you can sleep when you have a CPAP mask on.
Right.
And so they're like, I can't sleep like that. So I take it off because I just can't wear it, because of my pain and my limited range of motion. So that's aggravation. And another commonly one that you can link to aggravation is GERD. We see that a lot. A lot of guys have service connections for GERD, and it's one you wouldn't normally think can cause sleep apnea. The key is that it doesn't cause it. It aggravates it.
It aggravates, yes.
Yeah, so if you're wearing that CPAP mask at night, remember that CPAP mask is blowing air constantly. That's how it works. And that air is sometimes going to get into your esophagus. It opens up that sphincter that keeps the stomach contents in your stomach. And if you're really bad at reflux and regurgitation, you're most likely going to have an episode at nighttime. And a lot of guys will say, yeah, I can't wear that mask because I'll have, I'll regurgitate or I'll have reflux into the mask. And so I just don't wear it at all,
Right.
because it just makes everything worse. And so that is aggravation. That means because of your GERD, now you're not wearing that CPAP mask, which is the standard of care, and your sleep apnea progresses beyond what it normally would otherwise.
Right.
So now I think is a natural transition point to talk about the rating system when it comes to sleep apnea. I bring it up because right now the rating system has been set in stone for a while, but 2025 that the rating schedule is going to change. So let's talk about what it is now, and then we'll get into what it's going to be changing, because there's some big changes coming.
It was said to be changed in April. Right now, it's like we don't know. It's all up in the air.
Yeah, so we don't know. We keep hearing when it's going to happen. So we're in August now, but it's all hearsay.
It's all hearsay.
So what is it currently?
There's 100%.
And what is that?
That is where you're on the CPAP machine, and you have no effective treatment.
It pretty much means you're in chronic respiratory failure, and you got to wear that thing almost all the time.
Yes, and you're on a breathing apparatus.
So what are what's the most common one then?
The most common one will be 50%. That's because they're either on a CPAP, a nose pillow, or they have the you could probably help me out with this one.
The surgery?
The surgery.
Yeah,
one.
it's called the Inspire.
Yeah, Inspire.
Yeah,
That's it. Yeah,
it's like a nerve stimulator for one of your nerves to help
so
you open.
that one's not very common on that one. Mm-hmm. The most common I see is the CPAP and the nose pillow.
Yes, the key is you have to be on a sleep apnea, FDA approved sleep apnea treatment,
and that would be your automatic 50%.
I always ask, are you prescribed CPAP, nose pillow, or do you have had the surgery? And if they say no, I'm saying why? Go get it prescribed, even if you're not using it.
Right.
Get it prescribed, because right now that's an automatic 50%.
Automatic.
You're leaving compensation. You're leaving money on the table.
If you get service connected and you have the machine, it's a gimme 50%. Mm-hmm. If you're not on the machine but you do have sleep apnea, so say if you have hypoxic events or and you don't require it, it's a 30%.
That's the difference. Either you have the treatment or you don't. So if you have a diagnosis of sleep apnea without treatment, it's 30%.
Right.
If you have sleep apnea with treatment, 50%. So, you might as well get that prescribed. Now let's get into what's on the horizon, because the rating system is drastically changing.
So the automatic 50% is going to be taken away.
Yeah.
So get your claims in now.
If you haven't filed your intent to file, do it now, because you want to try to get grandfathered in.
The 50% is going to be due ineffective treatment with comorbid conditions without end organ damage. Now, these are some big words.
Yeah.
Which means, these are not like, these are things I don't wish on anybody. 100%. With the new rating, I don't want to ever see anybody on that. They're getting rid of the 30%, and then you got your 10%.
Yeah, it's actually 10%.
Which your 50%, which was your automatic, now you're going to get a 10%.
Yeah.
And that's because you're compliant and getting help, being treated, and getting relief from the CPAP machine. Yeah. And you're only going to get 10%.
So the takeaway here is right 40%. Now, current system, if you have CPAP machine, 50% rating. The new system, you have CPAP machine, 10%.
10%.
So that is the difference, right? So you're looking at a 40% difference. It behooves you to get your file to intent in now, get the claim done ASAP.
ASAP.
Because you're going to leave money on the table if you wait.
We're talking about thousands on the table that you're leaving.
How can a veteran strengthen their chances of getting service connected? So you've worked as a VSO, you're our director of veteran outreach. So you've seen lots of veterans come in. You've seen veterans that have got this approved. You've seen veterans that have been denied. What have you found is the differentiating factor between those that are denied and those that are approved? What level of evidence are they doing? What are they doing different? How are they establishing this? What have you seen?
It's always been a nexus letter, no matter what. It was like anytime that somebody came to me, if they did not have sandbox combat PTSD, I had to say, you're going to have to get a nexus letter. Mm-hmm. And the unfortunate part of being a VSO and being a federal employee, you cannot go out and be like, hey, I need you to go to Xera Health and I need you to talk to Dr. Marshall Barr. You know, you just kind of leave it open. Be like, I need you to get a nexus letter.
Yeah.
And, like, well, where would I go? Well, you can try here, ask your VSO or ask your VA. Well, we already kind of established that in another episode that VA is not going to write you on. It's not going to happen. It's always going to end with having to get a nexus. And I tell that everybody that comes through here and they, I'm talking to them and they're like, I have sleep apnea. And I'm like, they're like, I'm going to try it on my own, and I'm like, I'm just from personal experience. I've done this thousands of times. You're going to need a nexus. A nexus is your best friend because as much as they say that the VA is unbiased, they are biased.
It sometimes feels that way, right?
It feels that way when it comes to sleep apnea. The evidence to show is going to be the best friend in your claim for sleep apnea. If you're married, it's your spouse.
Yeah. So why? What do you mean?
She or he, I don't want to, genderify anything. They are your best witness of what's happening because you don't know what's happening when you're sleeping.
Yeah.
They are the ones that see you day in and day out of what's happening while you're sleeping.
So is that the importance of doing a witness statement?
Yes, that would be a lay statement. They're your best advocates for sleep apnea.
And with the witness statement, what I typically say, because they're probably already diagnosed sleep apnea, so they don't have to establish, yes, my spouse has sleep apnea, he stops breathing, he snores. I mean, they can tell, how long it's been going on for. But the key thing I always tell, veterans and spouses when it comes to the witness statement is talk about, especially if you're trying to service connect to another disability, right?
Right.
Is say why they think it's because of that, right? Mm-hmm. Say, before he went to war, he was totally normal. And then he came back, he's got PTSD, and all of a sudden he started snoring. He never did that before.
Right.
And it's been getting more severe. And, on top of that, he has really bad nightmares every night. And I notice he moves around a lot. He thrashes. He rips off that mask. And he has never made it through the night wearing that mask.
Right.
So again, they're corroborating that story of both causation and aggravation.
Then you have people with roommates. They could do a buddy statement. Mm-hmm. When somebody else is writing something on your behalf, it holds a little bit more weight because they're seeing it firsthand. And they can document very well of like, okay, well, they're stopped breathing or they're turning blue. I have to shove them to wake them up. Yeah. Because they're turning blue and I don't know if they're alive.
This is a medical legal thing, the whole VA process. So it's more on the legal side. So you've got to have as much evidence that can corroborate, the reason that's happening,
right,
the cause and the aggravating event.
Yes.
So that's the key to those witness statements. We have seen veterans that are able to do it on their own. They don't need a medical opinion. They don't need a nexus letter. But typically what differentiates them, what I've seen is they have really good paper trail documentation with their providers.
Yes.
It's documented in their medical records. They do secure chats with their provider, and it's written in there that essentially without the veteran or without the provider writing a nexus letter, they're saying, this veteran has had weight gain. It's probably because he's sedentary because of his knee pain, and that's probably what's leading to sleep apnea.
Right.
But that's the long route, the long game.
The very long game.
A lot of veterans, they don't have the patience for it, or they think they're telling the provider this stuff and the provider's not writing it down.
I've seen that quite some times as a VSO.
Yeah.
I told my provider this, and I go through the record and I read the note and I'm like, not in there.
Yeah, that's a common mistake, right? And I say this, oh my gosh, every episode, and I'll say it again, every episode from here on out, is don't assume what you tell your doctor or your provider, that they're going to write it down. They are busy, and they likely are not going to write it down because they've got to see 20, 25 people in a day.
Right.
So your best opportunity to ensure that it gets into your record is to use your secure message feature on whatever electronic medical record system you have.
Yes.
If you're going to the VA, that's your My Healthy Vet, your secure chat feature. Use that to your advantage, right? So send a message to your provider and say you're trying to link it to your PTSD. You say, hey, doc, since my PTSD, since I've started on this medication, the sertraline medication, an antidepressant, I noticed that I've been gaining a lot of weight. It's been really hard to lose weight. And what you're doing is you're establishing this trend of weight gain, right? And that's the argument you're going to use for your sleep apnea.
Right.
You can even go as far as, I've been gaining all this weight from, lack of motivation. I overeat when I'm depressed. I am on this medication. Could that have led to my sleep apnea? Because I didn't have this before.
Right.
So all those words you write then go into your medical record. You can't take that away. That goes in your medical record, and now that is discoverable. And when they do the CMP exam.
Right.
And again, I've said this before, the second most important thing is the provider has to respond to it. If you ask your question in a way that, allows for that natural nexus statement to occur, you're establishing that evidence.
Right.
So you ask, is this possible that my weight gain from my PTSD has led to my sleep apnea? They say yes. That is the nexus event. Mm-hmm. By definition. Then those are the cases where you don't need a medical letter.
Right.
But I do tend to agree. It does seem with the sleep apnea cases we see, most of them have been denied. Well, all of them have been denied, I would say. Everyone that comes with a sleep apnea. So usually they're needing some form of a medical opinion. But remember, we always, here at Xterra Health, we always advocate that you get it from your primary or whoever you're seeing personally, because that they know you the best.
Yes.
So ask your VA provider, ask your private provider. Hopefully they provide one for you. Historically, there's been a lot of no's, especially when it comes to the VA.
No's, or private doctors don't do it very often, and they don't know how to write it, or they don't know what to write.
Yeah, and so what happens is they don't use the right VA-friendly language, and it gets shot down. Yeah. So yeah, that's the important piece, right? We look at the the body as a whole here. When we look at sleep apnea, it is a very doable claim. Most likely, it's not going to happen as a primary. You're going to have to tie it as a secondary, and if you do that, you just have to have solid medical rationale as to why it's causing it,
right,
or why it's aggravating it. So use your resources, use your witness statement, write that personal statement, rely on that secure chat feature, get an independent medical opinion. These are all you want to overwhelm with evidence into your favor to win this. And do it now, right? Before everything changes.
Do it now. With sleep apnea, is you want to hold the VA rater's hand along the whole time. You want to hold his hand, or his or her hand, mm-hmm, because they're one track minded.
Again, overwhelm them with evidence.
Overwhelm it.
Well, do you have any closing statements that you have, Josh? Anything that the viewers should know, or that you've seen personally, or maybe even an anecdotal story of a success story that you've had?
So with my closing things, I want to say is that don't be discouraged by being denied with sleep apnea. There's so many ways to get it service connected. You're leaving money on the table. There's so many avenues to get it service connected, and you're leaving money out there. And I have I've had it service connected so many ways. Some ways you think it's not even possible. Tinnitus, ringing in the ears, sleep apnea, service connected. Bam. They were at 10%. They said that they weren't going to get, they were like, I have nothing else. Mm-hmm. I have nothing else. I'm just going to get $174 for the rest of my life, and that's all I'm going to get. And I'm like, we could do sleep apnea. Now they got 60%.
Yeah.
And now they're getting several hundred other, they're getting almost $1,000 just because of sleep apnea. And I was like, just do it. Just do it, because tonight it's we got to get a little bit of evidence in there. We got to do some work, but that's all it takes is just a little bit of work. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of work, but just got to do the work and play the game. If you play the game, it works out in your favor.
It's unfortunate it has to be a game, but that's the whole point we're doing this podcast, right? Because we and our viewers understand the VA loves to put hurdles, obstacles in front of us. If they would love it if they say denied and you just stop. But we don't get discouraged. Just keep going, one foot in front of the next. Find advocates that are going to help you in the process. Okay. Listen to us. Tune in. Get the education that we can provide you. All right.
Follow us weekly, and there's going to be so many things that come out.
Yeah, and that's a wrap on the sleep apnea one, and we're excited because next week we're actually going to talk another big one. A commonly claimed one is migraines.
Yes.
And so we're going to go through again causes, primary, secondaries, and rating. But tune in for next week. Until then, stay mission ready.